In this module, we'll talk about food poisoning and its controls. So the usual food poisoning characteristics, and again, this is a level 2 course, so we are not going to go into great details. The details would be more relevant for the level 3 course, but the incubation is between 1 to 36 hours. So what's the incubation period? This is the time between the food has been consumed and the first signs of illness. The duration period is between 1 to 7 days. It usually requires a very large number of food poisoning organisms to cause an illness. We'll see that this is not always the case. So there are different risk groups. So obviously the elderly people, very young children and babies, pregnant women and unborn babies, and also ill people, so immunocompromised, are more at risk. So we need to pay very specific attention to what we do and the way we do it so that we don't put these people at risk. So there are 6 main causes of food poisoning. So viruses, bacteria and toxins, poisonous metals. So for instance, if you were to cook acidic food into a copper pan, this will trigger a chemical reaction which can make people very, very sick. Molds, for instance, mycotoxins, as I was mentioning earlier with the toast of the moldy bread. Poisonous chemicals contained inside the food or coming from outside the food, so herbicides, pesticides, or cleaning products, and poisonous plants and fish. So amongst poisonous plants and fish, there is pufferfish, of course, rhubarb leaves, a green part of a potato, red kidney beans if they are undercooked. The obvious pufferfish can kill people, and so can rhubarb leaves and numerous other very dangerous substances. So we really need to pay attention to that, and I'll just emphasize on the fact that these are not relating to allergies. There is a concept that's called foodborne diseases, which means that the disease is transmitted by the food and within the food, as opposed to waterborne, which could be transmitted by water, or airborne, which could be transmitted by air. So these are usually viruses. So it takes a small number of viruses to make someone ill. Why? Because viruses multiply in someone's body, as opposed to bacteria, which need food to multiply. Yet, there are some viruses that behave like bacteria and vice versa. So norovirus, you've probably heard the term before, and this is very frightening on boats because it gets in the water. So this is not only foodborne, this is also waterborne. So that means you could be contaminated by norovirus while brushing your teeth or taking a shower. So on cruise ships, I've worked on there too. If 3% of everyone on board is contaminated by norovirus, everything stops. The boat has to stay in port. So this is called a projectile vomiting bug. So it does what it says. This is very, very nasty. Campylobacter. So Campylobacter is usually found in poultry. Why? Because poultry are chickens, ducks, etc. They are grown close to each other, and basically they walk into their own fecal material, and Campylobacter is transmitted through that, and then this is landing onto the meat, and it needs cooking to kill Campylobacter. Campylobacter is a virus that behaves like a bacteria. So in the UK, this is found that 74% of the chickens sold in retail businesses are contaminated by Campylobacter. Yet, the importance to prevent cross-contamination at all costs and cook the food properly and thoroughly. So minimum 75 degrees. I know that chefs will tell me that 75 degrees is too high and this is going to lead the meat to be dry, etc. But remember the risk groups that we were talking about earlier. So if you were to undercook chicken for elderly and fragile people, what would happen? You could be killing somebody. So really pay attention to that. E. coli 0157, so this can be found in beef burgers and can cause kidney failure. So this is also a very nasty agent. This is actually a virus. Not all E. coli are harmful, but this one is 0157 and 0147. So this is usually found in soil. Then the virus is consumed by the cattle. Then they go to the slaughterhouse, and if the fecal material happens to get in contact with the meat, this can be transmitted into the meat. So unless there is a laboratory analysis prior the food is being cooked, this can lead to very serious consequences. And as this is a foodborne disease, this can also be transmitted through people to more food, to more people. I will show you the contamination chain a little bit later on. This actual E. coli 0157 killed an 11 years old boy, was eaten in a quick burger restaurant, the equivalent to McDonald's in Montpellier. And the poor child had a kidney failure for the last 6 years and eventually died from it. And this is very serious. Typhoid, so this is usually triggered by salmonella. And listeria, so listeria is very weird. It will multiply quickly in refrigerators. This is very dangerous for pregnant women. So you really want to avoid that. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but you can go online, check the listeria outbreak that they had in the UK last year. You will see that this is pretty frightening. So the contamination chain of foodborne diseases is as such. It's not glamorous, but this is the way it works. So it spreads by what's called the fecal-oral route. So people going to the toilet, contaminating sewage, which is then being used on plants, which people will consume. Then more people will go to the toilet, contaminate more sewage, which will then contaminate more plants, etc. This is what led to the 2009 food safety outbreak, which spread across Europe and killed 36 people. So it was initiated by fennel seeds coming from Turkey, then being planted in Germany, contaminated German people, who then contaminated Dutch people, who then contaminated Spanish people, contaminated French people, etc. 36 people died, and it took more than 3 weeks to discover where was the problem coming from. So I let you imagine what were the stores using spinaches, cucumbers, raw products, like in supermarkets, in metro and places like that. They were empty. Nobody wanted to eat those anymore. Not only that it killed people, but also it killed a whole economy. And so they multiply in the body. That's why they make people sick. And this is the main difference between a bacteria and a virus, is that the viruses will multiply in the body and the bacteria will multiply into the food. It will take a very large number of bacteria to make people sick and a small number of viruses. Remember that viruses, and we see it now with the COVID, can survive on surfaces too. So is this true or false? Onset time is the time between eating food and the first signs of illness. So this is also known as the incubation period. Viruses are much larger than bacteria. False. Viruses multiply in the food. False. Except from an exception, Campylobacter will behave like a bacteria and therefore multiply. Some foodborne disease bacteria can multiply in the refrigerator. Yes, Listeria would. Only small numbers of foodborne disease organisms are needed to cause an illness. And that's true. Foodborne disease organisms always need to multiply in food to cause an illness. That's false. They can multiply in the body. Sewage contamination of food can result in foodborne disease. Yes. Some food poisoning bacteria can affect the nervous system. Yes. Food poisoning bacteria, viruses, food poisoning in general can have very, very serious consequences. People have been paralyzed. Obviously, people died. You can get blind. You can get all sorts of things from food poisoning bacteria and viruses. Animals and flies are a source of food poisoning bacteria.